React IR2 from St. Rock on the bench today. This is a reactive load with built-in digital effects and IR loading. There's quite a lot of features on here, and it's pretty well spec considering the price point that this comes in at. It's a nice chunky unit as well with an optional rack mounting kit that I've got set up here at the moment. It's also got a USB connection and a Bluetooth connection to use the free control software with it. On the back, you've got plenty of different ins and outs. This can also act as an attenuator, a reactive load, or sort of an old school resistive or passive load on here as well. So you've got an 8 ohm input on the back. You can run an amp up to 100 watts. There is a speaker through option. There is a DI tap on here. So if you wanted to use this with an external IR loader and other effects, you can do that. There's various ground lift switches for the different parts of the circuits on here. There's stereo XLR outputs on here. There's a stereo effects loop as well. And then on the front, you've got a bunch of switches here to change up the character of the load. You've got a passive or reactive load switch over here, and each of those has 2 different modes on there. So I guess you've got 4 different combinations. Now, if you're like me, you're probably most interested in having this as a reactive load. We will hear the passive version on there, and there's one use case that I have thought up there, but you know, reactive loads rule. They sound really, really good, and they can sound very, very close to a real speaker cabinet on here. So we should fire this up with a couple of my favorite amps. We'll take a look at the control software later in the video. There's timestamps. Let's dive in. What better way to get started than by plugging a Les Paul into a Marshall? This is a late 70s Les Paul Artist with some Mr. Glynn's pickups in it. I'm running that into my headfirst modified Marshall 2959. We will start off with the master volume on the amp at around 9 o'clock. I've got the extra gain stage engaged, and I just want to demonstrate the difference between the reactive and passive modes on here, and then mode 1 and mode 2. I've got my free IR loaded into the React IR2 at the moment. There's a low cut at 80 Hertz and a high cut at 8 kilohertz. That is going straight into my audio interface with no post-processing. Let's have a listen. You can hear a pretty big difference between the reactive and passive modes on there. I think I just prefer having both buttons pushed in on there. So I've got mode 2 with the reactive load. That sounds and feels like a great reactive load. One application that I did think of for the passive mode, I initially thought that was kind of odd that that was even included on there, but you could like roll your own power station with this, if that makes sense. So you could take, say, a 100 watt Marshall, run it into the React IR on the passive mode, and then run that to like the effects return of a smaller tube amp or to a tube power amp. I guess you could do the opposite, where you could take a low wattage amp, run it into the React IR passive mode, and then into like a 100 watt power section or something like that. So that would be one application you could use that for, but I think most of us are just going to want to use this as a reactive load on there. I also like that there's an input control on there. So with the amp set up at the moment, I've got the master volume engaged, so I've got that quite low. If I wanted to crank up the master volume and essentially remove it from the circuit, then I've just got an old school plexi. I just need to turn the input on the React IR down a little bit. It sounds like this. Boogie Mark 4 on the lead channel now. I have both buttons pushed in on the React IR. I'm in drop C on this PRS SC245. It's got the stock pickups and electronics, and it sounds like this. You can connect the remote control software with a USB cable like I'm doing at the moment, or you can use the React IR's Bluetooth connection to hook up the remote control software wirelessly. When you do, you've got a large block diagram of the whole unit. You've got your input and output levels at the bottom that can be run independently or linked together with this button here. You've got your preset list at the top. You can set the tempo for your preset, which will allow you to sync time-based effects. We'll have a look at that in a second. You've got a global, MIDI, and foot switch menu up here. Furthermore, you've got the ability to use the tone matcher. So you could create your own IRs, or you could match tones to a particular reference that you've got. Very handy in there. Then you've got your list of effects over here. So there's a stereo linkable gate. There's the IR loader. You can run a single IR, a stereo IR, quad IRs, or you can run IRs in series over here. So if you had like a tone match IR or something you've made that you want to apply to an existing cab and mic IR, you can do that. If I was using the stereo loop, I'd use the same IR loaded in stereo. So if you did that, you've got a width control over here and independent high and low cuts on each channel, but I don't have the loop hooked up at the moment. So I'm just gonna run a single IR. This is my free IR that's linked in the video description. This is a JTG by Tyler into the Boogie Mark 4 clean channel. That kind of thing going on, a cleanish sound, definitely a clean sound for me. There's a stereo linkable EQ we can kick in. So I'm just adding a high shelf at 3K and pulling out a bit of 200 in here. You can link or unlink these over here. And each band in here has a variety of different options. You can adjust the frequency, the Q, and the gain on there, which is pretty nifty. So let's kick that in. It will just make everything sound a bit brighter and shinier. That clean sound's already pretty spanky and bright, so I'm going to leave that off. There's a stereo compressor in here. Let's have a listen to what this does. I have this linked, so when you've got them linked and you want to adjust, say, the threshold, the ratio, or any of these controls, both channels will move in unison. You can set them separately if you wanted a spatial style effect on there, or you were futzing around with something in the effects loop. Let's have a listen. Get pretty squishy on there. We might revisit that in a little bit. What really impresses me on this unit, and I think it's a real point of difference to some comparable units from, say, Two Notes or Boss, is the chorus tremolo, delay, and reverb section in here. Now, the chorus section gives you pretty typical controls for rate, depth, delay time, feedback, low cut, and LFO shape. The trem lets you set the rate, depth, and the shape of the tremolo on there, but you have different modes available in here, and I find it quite interesting that Saint Rock have a dimension chorus mode in here. You can have the dimension mode and go to, say, dimension 3 as a preset, and you've got the classic Roland or Boss dimension sound, whereas like the Boss was a tube amp expander, doesn't have a dimension mode in there. This sounds pretty great as well. I'm quite fond of this Fat 1 warm chorus mode as well. Let's hear the trem now. You can sync either the tremolo or the chorus to the tempo of the tune with various subdivisions. So you can see you've got just about every subdivision you want, or you can set it manually. I've got it at 4.37 hertz. I don't know why I chose 4.37. It just kind of ended up there. You can set the depth and the amount of dry sound in there. There's also a panning mode, a normal mode, a harmonic mode in there, and a couple of combinations. Let's have a listen to those. The delay section is pretty awesome as well. You've got the option to run a dual or a quad delay in here. With the dual delay, you have a ducking section. There's modulation with selectable waveforms on here, and you can sync your delays again to different rhythmic subdivisions in here. I've got a quarter note and a dotted eighth note delay on here. You can have them set up as a normal dual delay, a ping pong, or with cross feedback on there. Let's just hear the normal delay, and we'll come back around to some of those other modes, including the multi-tap quad delay as well with a dirty sound. And then you've got a variety of different reverb options. You can set the amount of dry and wet signal. Reverb, I'm guessing, is the overall time or decay on there. Then they're grouped by type. So you've got halls, rooms, plates. You've got some ambiences, some springs, and some early reflections in here. Let's hear the mid plate to start. little goes a long way with those reverbs. Now, I've switched over to the lead channel with a fat switch on the Mark IV. Let's kick in the gate. That gets rid of a whole bunch of hiss over there. Then I'm just going to add this ambience mid reverb on here. Not a lot of verb going on. We'll play around with that dimension chorus and then kick in some super greasy dual and quad delays. That is pretty awesome. I've swapped over to the quad tap delay mode, which you access down here. I would say one point of feedback I have with this is it would make a lot more sense to have a dedicated mode icon on here somewhere at the top so you can go, hey, do I want the dual delay or do I want the quad delay in here? Put it right in the center so that we can all see it and then know what mode we're on. Having it tucked away down here is a little unintuitive to me. But anyway, what I've got is a dotted quarter note, a quarter note, and an eighth note delay set up over here. And it's kind of got a lexicon circular style delay thing going on. You can add high cut to the feedback network on there. This one is pretty awesome and it sounds super wide as well. That's me sorted. I'm so happy that this Loadbox not only sounds like a really good reactive load, that I can dial in greasy modulation, delay, and reverb on it, rack mount it, run it into my audio interface, and then it totally removes the need for any external gear if I want to run my amps silently. I love that so much. Of course, if you're running dual or quad IRs, you can blend different IRs, and we all know the impact that different cab IRs have on the tone. So let's hear a couple of different built-in IRs. It looks like there's at least 30 of them over here. You know, we could go for like a Friedman greenback on one channel, and we could use, where is it? It's going to be like a Friedman V30 on the other side and play around with the width. I can keep the width really, really low. I should turn these effects off, I guess. I might leave the delay on. Let's just turn the modulation off, and I'll just increase the width over here. Now, there are definitely some quirks to the way that software works, but I think that's pretty true of any other Loadbox with similar specs, like say the Boss was a tube amp expander or the Two Notes series on there. You don't have a DynIR style, skeuomorphic interface where you can move virtual mics around on there, which personally isn't a big thing for me. I basically use the one IR for everything that I do. I like having the different IRs in there. I think they sound really nice and they're generally pretty balanced and usable. The ability to make your own IRs with this is super cool as well. But I think the point of difference in there is having the two different impedance curves in there, having the ability to save presets and see the big screen in there and just kind of scroll through it, and then having the excellent sounding modulation, delay, and reverb in there. They are kind of a step above what I think a lot of other companies are doing, where they're just mostly slapping like a pretty generic delay or reverb section, or maybe they're adding like a faux doubling style sound or something in there. If you're like me and you're like tweaking and you're like old rack units, you can definitely hear the legacy of those old rack units in there. That's the thing that I like the most, being able to say, take that Mark Series head, connect it to the Loadbox, add the grease, take it straight to the interface. I don't need any external gear on there. I like all the extra ins and outs, like the stereo loop, the ability to use this as an attenuator, the fact that you can load the amp down, then take an XLR DI out without any processing. So before you hit the DSP section in here, it's pretty amazing that Saint Rock have not only put all of this into one box, the fact they're making it out of Ukraine at the moment as well. Mass respect. And I think it's pretty amazing value for money as well. So I'll put a link in the video description to the Saint Rock website if you want to check this out for yourself. They were kind enough to send this unit out to me so that I can make some noise with it. And you're going to be hearing it a lot on future demos, particularly of amplifiers here. If you like what I'm doing on the channel, links to my music and my Patreon are in the video description. Have a great day.